Boa tarde, clã! Sejam muito bem-vindos a mais uma live aqui no Ataque Crítico. Hoje, finalmente, saiu aqui a review da Digital Foundry do PlayStation 5 Pro. Uma análise que eu acho que todo mundo que tá minimamente curioso para ver como é que tá o console tá ansioso para ver. E como eu botei no vídeo de hoje que a gente mandou um pouco mais cedo, né, de manhã, nenhuma das reviews eu fiquei 100% satisfeito com a cobertura, né? Teve muitos jogos que a gente quer ver como é que tá, que não mostraram. Mostraram jogos que ninguém tá interessado pra ver, que já são bonitos no PlayStation 5 base, né? Então, vamos ver se a Digital Foundry fez 1 hora e 20 minutos, tá? Então, ó, pega o cafezinho, que nós vamos aí ficar 1 hora e 20 minutos ouvindo eles falar. É claro que a gente vai pausar aqui, né? Conforme for, pra gente ir conversando e ir agregando um assunto aqui, né? Conforme eles forem falando. Mas nós vamos fazer um reactzão aqui dele pra poder dar uma olhada, beleza, meu povo? Mas aí, como é que vocês estão? Fala Felipe, fala Cid, fala Caio, fala Snake. Ó, o Carlos também tá aqui, o Igor. E aí, rapaziada, como é que vocês estão? Ah, o café, eu esqueci de tacar o adoçantezinho. Ele tá amargão pra caralho. Tá amargão pra caralho. Pera aí. Só um segundo. Mas e aí, vamos falando pra vocês. Só um detalhe, rapaziada. A gente tá transmitindo aqui a live em 4K. Acho que, pô, pra gente fazer um react do negócio em 4K, né? De ver o console em 4K. Acho necessário. Então a gente tem um delay muito grande, acho que como vocês podem ver aqui do chat, né? Até vocês eu falar pra vocês verem. Mas, então, fiquem sem isso. Café bom é sem açúcar? Cara, sem açúcar eu concordo, mas, pô, 4 gotinhas de um adoçante, eu acho que ela agrega, é necessária. Pronto, pronto. Parece que algumas empresas nem se deram o trabalho de usar o console. Vamos ter que esperar os próximos jogos. Cara, teve muita coisa assim que a gente viu, mano, por enquanto. E isso é um mau sinal, eu acho, né, pro console, né? A gente não sabe o quanto realmente eles usaram 100% do potencial dele ou foi mais um desleixo. Mas pode ser também um desleixo que a gente veja do futuro também, né? Teve no PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4 Pro, perdão, teve muita coisa também que a gente viu que eles usaram de uma forma bem desleixada. Então, pode ser que a história se repita aqui com o 5 Pro também. De só ligar o PSSR. Eu tô vendo aqui que o PSSR ele é a muleta aqui, né, do console. Eu vi a análise da Adrenaline, ficou muito bom. Esse PS5 Pro aí é só pra quem tem muita grana pra gastar. Cara, eu vi a análise da Adrenaline, mas eu achei a escolha de jogos dele infelizes. Eles escolheram Ratchet Clank, o Homem-Aranha e Horizon. Nenhum desses jogos eu tô minimamente curioso pra ver como é que tá rodando no PlayStation 5 Pro. Eu acho que são jogos... tirando Ratchet Clank, o Homem-Aranha 2, ele... Tá. Eles são exclusivos do PlayStation 5, exceto o Horizon. O Horizon, ele roda bonito no PlayStation 4. Né? Ele roda no PlayStation 4 bonito. Então, assim, não gostei, assim, da escolha dos jogos, mas a análise ficou boa mesmo. Vamos lá então, clã. Vamos começar aqui a reagir, mas a gente vai trocando ideia, né? A ideia é que a gente vá vendo aqui e trocando ideia. Tá com legenda automática, tá? Mas, tipo assim, eu vou botar, eles falam um pouquinho devagar, vou botar no 1.25, eu sei que tem gente que não gosta de assistir acelerado, então eu vou botar só no 1.25, um pouquinho, se bem que vai atrapalhar a gente ver a performance, né? Deixa no 1.0 mesmo, vamos lá.
Welcome back to Digital Foundry. The wait is finally over. PlayStation 5 Pro is here, and we're now able to present our full
Tô vendo aqui
review.
na dúvida se cancela ou não. Medo de cancelar e de me arrepender. Estava mó animado até hoje. Cara, vamos ver se a Digital Foundry, né, mostra alguma coisa.
But for this one, we're going parallel. 3 of us are combining our impressions and our testing to bring you what we hope will be the best possible review we're capable of in the time frame. So joining me first of all, John Linneman. Hello.
Hey, good to be here, Rich. Yes, we've been spending a lot of time with the PS5 Pro, still capturing. Our very own Audie Surley is here behind me, capturing more Spider-Man. for upcoming videos as well. So
Eles estão
there's going to be a
capturando
lot
Homem-Aranha.
happening
Cara,
over
por
these
que
next
que
few
todo mundo
days.
foca no
All
Homem-Aranha, mano?
resources are being deployed.
Homem-Aranha roda
which gets
60
to the
FPS
Oliver
com Ray
Mackenzie.
Tracing no
Hello.
PS5 base.
Yes, Rich, the next few days and indeed possibly the next few months will be very busy with PS5 Pro content, I suspect.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's just get straight into it. Let's talk first of all about hardware. Impressions. What do we make of the console? Now, John and I shared some initial impressions in the epoch-making unboxing video that we did, and generally, I think the takeaway was that it's very
Rasgou completamente a
well-built,
caixa, velho.
decent console. It's much smaller than we thought. 3.1 kilograms. It's lighter than the launch model by a considerable degree.
Do que o Fat.
I'm actually quite taken with it. I think it's pretty good, and can't comment on the thermals without ripping it apart and inserting probes, etc. But
Na Rockstar
it's
confia
just
60
as quiet
FPS.
as any other PlayStation
não sei,
5.
viu?
John, what do you think?
Yeah, I tend to agree.
sei, viu?
I was, as you saw from the unboxing, I was taken aback, surprised, I would say, by the size. The size reduction compared to the base model. I think it's a more attractive looking unit, and I think that actually goes a long way. But at the same time, it also feels very familiar once you actually get going, right? You slap the disk drive on there, as I did. That process, this was my first time doing that process. It went fairly smoothly, I would say.
Yeah.
Although it required a firmware update before I could actually do so.
Igual no Slim.
So it went through
Mesma
all that
coisa.
initially, get it hooked up, and then it just behaves exactly like a normal PlayStation 5. And this is actually kind of an interesting point, because that was one of the big differences between the 5 and the 4 Pro. Because with the 4 Pro, you instantly got that 4K UI, and the whole user experience felt tailored for this new machine. But obviously, we're already in the age of 4K, so you don't get that. And as a result, it just feels like a continuation of the PS5. But still,
É, o PS5
as you
e
said,
meio.
the hardware itself is nice. The ports, everything on it is well located. I feel like it's a solid machine overall.
Vou falar uma coisa assim que é um problema de uma minoria de pessoas, tá? Mas eu não sei por que até hoje não funciona eu colocar. Eu tenho um HD externo que ele não tá aqui. Ele é é como se fosse um SSD, só que ele é externo. Ele é ligado pro USB, né? Eu já tentei ligar ele em todas as portas do console. Aqui, atrás e tal. Ele só funciona nessa entrada aqui, que é a entrada USB-C da frente. Não sei porquê. Eu já vi fóruns no Reddit com o mesmo problema. Não funciona. E agora, agora o Pro ele tem 2 entradas USB-C aqui, né? Então, por que eu digo isso? O PlayStation VR, ele precisa do USB-C. Então, em teoria, eu agora vou conseguir ligar meu HD externo e o meu PlayStation VR sem precisar ficar trocando a porta? Algo a se testar.
So these first few days with it.
Yeah, the optical drive does have the online requirement as well. We've got some capture of that here.
Yes.
A bit unfortunate. I still think that the Pro, being a Pro model, and the fact that it's appealing to the core enthusiast who's probably been with PlayStation for years, should have had a physical drive in the box.
And I want to note, Rich, real quick on that.
Então, gostaria de saber de vocês. Eu não sei se concordo com essa palavra aí. Tipo, porque o console já é caro, né? Ele já é... O maior negativo do console é o preço dele. Ele ia custar $700. Se eles fossem botar um drive de disco, o console ia ser mais caro. Ponto. Ele ia ser mais caro. Eles não iam vender. Eles iam vender a 750, sei lá, no mínimo, né? E eu digo mais. Eu acho que eles exageraram no SSD também. Se eles tivessem feito um SSD menor, de 1 tera, e abaixasse o preço de acordo, dá o upgrade quem precisa. Quem quer fazer coisa com drive de disco, compra o drive de disco. Quem quer fazer ter mais armazenamento, compra armazenamento. Eu acho que não devia vir. Eu acho que não devia vir mesmo, né?
I was looking for games that are PS5 Pro enhanced, like Motorfest, The Crew, Lords of the Fallen and such, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll grab those real quick. The prices on the store are still $79.99 for Lords of the Fallen, $69.99 for The Crew Motorfest. I
o
instead
preço
found
dos-
copies online for $15 a
O preço
piece.
dos jogos lá na
So
Europa tá
it's
foda.
just an illustration of why it's not just about collecting or preservation or anything like that. It is a price thing. And
Basic
yes, there are
economics.
sales sometimes. Exactly. If there's no competition in that space, that's not good for your wallet. And I think that's definitely a situation here where if you're a new PS5 Pro owner, you can't find the disk drive, you don't have the disk drive, you're going to be getting raked over the coals.
Right. Okay. Oliver, let's talk about your impressions of the unit.
Yeah, it's surprisingly not that large. Even though I've seen the hardware
Yes.
before, it was still a little bit surprising to me. It's just a
Cara,
little...
é bizarro como reduzir, às vezes, um pouco do... né, a evolução tecnológica acontece. Vocês lembram do Xbox One X? O Xbox One X era, pô, em comparação com o primeiro Xbox One, ele era minúsculo, né, cara? Foi até uma surpresa que quando eles anunciaram, eles tiraram, tipo, ele, tipo, dentro de uma carcaça do outro, assim. Pô, ficou bem legal. É interessante ver como é que a gente vai evoluindo, né, na
than a
tecnologia.
PS5 Slim model. It's smaller than a PS5 launch model by quite a margin, I would say. And it's quite light as well, like you mentioned. Quite similar looking to a Slim machine. I kind of wish they'd done a little bit more to differentiate it. Maybe a different color for the faceplates. Maybe a bit more of a break. Or maybe like a spike or something bold, right?
O design,
Between those two
ele na cor
faceplates,
branca é
they've
feio.
done that kind of three-stripe design,
Ele
but
preto
it's not
deve
that
ficar legal.
distinctive, I would say.
Eu não gosto
Even the
dessa linha no meio dele
PS5 or
preta,
rather
não.
the PS4 Pro, I think was a bit more distinctive in its physical characteristics with that kind of three-layer sandwich as opposed to the two-layer
E fez
sandwich.
o PS2 Fat e o PS2 Slim ridículo. Pô, é verdade, o PS2 Slim, nossa senhora.
But, you know,
Uma
with
fatia
respect
do
to that
bagulho.
PS4 Pro, that unit had a bit of a reputation for being very loud, especially as it matured. And here, I noticed when I powered the unit on, it was very, very quiet. The heat that came out of it was of a similar character in terms of its hotness to a regular PS5 console. And I think that probably like the overall design is pretty well designed here. And I suspect it will probably age pretty well because the PS5s that I've had have aged quite well as well. So I think this will probably be a console that continues to be relatively quiet, continues to be pretty well behaved under load. At least over the lifespan of the console, I would
Em
suspect,
justa
based
comparação ao
on
drive
what we've
disso,
seen so
eles
far with the
poderiam ter colocado o
PS5's design.
PS5 Fat
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on.
ao
We're going to
digital,
go
né?
a bit deeper
Concordo.
now. I want to talk about the HDMI controller on the PlayStation 5 Pro because, John, there's problems with the HDMI controller on the base PlayStation 5, 32 gigabits per second bandwidth, which basically means that you can't get 120 hertz output at 444 or RGB, right? It's chroma subsampling down to 422, right?
That's correct. And yeah, for those unclear with chroma subsampling, you're essentially processing the different colors at a different resolution. So you lose some fidelity. It's actually very difficult to spot during normal games. It's most obvious
Ainda
if
mais
you
pela
load up
TV.
something like a very fine per pixel image, like a computer desktop,
Mas no monitor
or
tem uma
small
diferencinha
text
mesmo,
with
dá
a
pra
lot of
perceber,
detail
quando
in
tá
it.
perto,
Then
assim,
you
tá.
can actually see some of that fringing and a little bit of noise and artifacting around things. We had hoped that the PS5 Pro would
Esse mano olhando pra
essentially
câmera dá medo,
conquer
Rich?
this because
Rich tem olhar
as we
meio
know,
sério,
it now
né?
supports 8K output, which you'll get to in a moment there, Rich.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the 4K 120 mode is still limited to 422. So even if there have been changes made, it does not address this fundamental limitation, and we're still limited to 32 gigabits per second, it seems, as a result, when in 120 hertz mode.
Okay, so here's the thing, right? 8K output requires essentially twice the bandwidth of 4K at 120 hertz. So the display controller has got to be upgraded, right? That's just pure logic. So we kind of think it is, but not in the way you might expect. So we've got capture here of a PS5 Pro attached to an 8K screen. Now, looking at the signal types supported, we've got 8K there or 4320p. But looking at 4K, 120 hertz is still limited to 422. So now connecting the Pro to my 8K capture cards, the Pro isn't having it. The menus say I need both 60 hertz support, which I have got, but also DSC, which my capture card hasn't got. DSC is display stream compression. So theory crafting time here, but I think Sony has added compression support to the display controller, but it's likely still limited to 32 gigabits per second of bandwidth. I guess the good thing is that display stream compression is lossless, to the best of my knowledge, so there's no loss of quality. And actually on an 8K supported screen, you will get full resolution 8K RGB support, at 60 Hertz with HDR. But as there are no capture devices I'm aware of right now that support DSC, we can't show you 8K at the moment. That was the problem we had when we went to visit Codemasters for the F1 opportunity.
Entendi nada, mas muito bom.
Which is quite interesting. 8K,
eles estão falando tipo de saída de HDMI.
Not currently. I mean, I think what that fundamentally means is that everything's going to be scaled.
Mas tá lado mais, né?
And I'm not into that. Even with a pixel density like that, which would help a lot, you're still going to be relying on upscaling, which introduces some additional blur to the final output unless you do a nearest neighbor scale. And, you know, I also don't want any additional processing on top of that. And like you said, there are fewer 8K displays now than there were in 2020, I would say.
Cara,
how did you work that out?
Well,
TV 8K
at least from certain
absurdo,
lineups, for instance, LG used to offer more 8K displays, right? They've kind of rolled that back. They had these top-end 8K OLEDs even, and there's just less of this stuff now. Basically,
mano, TV 8K, cara, dependendo do tamanho da sua TV e da distância onde você sente,
you'll find that where once there was many 8K screens on display,
não vai nem ver a diferença do 4K para 1440p, viu? Em geral 8K, mano. 8K é loucura.
4K larger screens, they're pushing up towards 100 inches and beyond now, which
Tô
is
igual aquele
interesting.
meme do Gohan olhando pro céu.
I think it's just, we've realized that 8K, it's just, at the moment, a bridge too far in terms of delivering content, right?
Also, I mean, I think from Sony's perspective, even though they're shipping an 8K console, the world's first 8K console, in fact, which you'd think would be a point of some marketing triumphalism, you know?
Or at least a label on the box.
Right.
Well, exactly. They don't have a label on the box, so they don't really seem to want to tell people.
Olha, ele não tem a marquinha do 8K. A minha caixinha tem. Do meu base.
Or something, but just to speak
tá lá,
to John's
8K.
point, I think Samsung is the only TV manufacturer that is now shipping 8K panels every single year.
I think you're right.
Other manufacturers, like, you know, the top-end LGs, the top-end Sonys, they're all, whether you're talking about LCDs, whether you're talking about OLEDs, they're all 4K sets this year in 2024. I think they were all 4K sets as well in 2023. So it really, you'd have to go back a couple of years to find like 8K Sonys, 8K LGs. And like for my purposes, yeah, they are getting cheaper, but like I looked at the QN900D, which is an 8K version of the QN90D that I have back there.
Qual
I was considering buying it, possibly, when I got that panel, but it costs more than 3 times as much as the Q190D in the same size. And also the panel is worse in some respects. It only does 1400 nits peak brightness, not 2100 nits as my Q190D. So for my eyes, my light loving eyes, you know, 2100 is a lot better than 1400. So for sure, for me, it's like, well, you spend 3 times as much. Most of the time you're getting probably a worse
HD de
image
27 o 4K de 28.
You're getting a worse panel possibly
então seu 4K deve ser o mesmo monitor que o meu.
And frankly, at that pixel density, unless you're way over 100 inches,
aonde eu
I feel
sento
like the
aqui, mano,
extremely difficult to
é igual tu
appreciate.
falou, tem uma diferencinha.
Like on in a PC situation,
mas eu até, na hora que eu comprei, me arrependi na hora.
Watching a TV from even a
devia ter
close
pegado
viewing
um monitor
distance,
de
your eye can't
32
resolve that
pra ver
detail.
mais a diferença do 4K.
Which is perhaps the point. It's like the whole retina display concept, right? This whole thing of like, there's so many pixels that you can no longer distinguish the pixels is what they're going for. But still, not really.
I've said it before, but to me, 8K basically represents really good anti-aliasing as opposed to, you know, a massive boost to core image quality.
Aí, Lucas, boa tarde, meu bom.
Anti-aliasing when viewed at a distance.
O vídeo não é sobre o PS5 Pro, porque estão falando de TV. Eles estão falando sobre a necessidade, eu acho, de ter 8K, né? Igual falando do Fórmula 1, que ele roda em 8K e tal. Eles foram tranquilos, pô. Eles tomaram o tempo dele, que é 1h20. Oh, mas vai entrar agora. Vai entrar agora conteúdo do PS5 Pro. Vai lá, vamos lá.
It's a nice to have, but it's not a defining feature of the professional, I don't think. Okay, let's move on. We've just been talking about the menus. The menus also include a PlayStation 4 image enhancement feature. Now, we didn't really know what that was before we actually went hands-on with the unit. We were thinking maybe it's just like... Okay,
ninguém sabia. É uma parada que a Sony falou.
Better image quality and dynamic resolution scaling.
E não mostrou
games,
nada.
but that's not the case. It is a feature that's toggleable on the menu, and it does actually do something quite interesting. Now, Oliver, you're going to be doing a full video on this, but how about some cliff notes on your observations?
Yes, I'll give you the rundown here. So essentially you boot up your PS5 Pro, go into that display settings menu. there's an option to enhance image quality. For PS4 games, it says enhance image quality in the settings for PS4 games. It's turned on by default.
Ah,
so
já vem ativado.
Boot into PS4 software, you'll kind of figure out what's going on pretty quickly, I think, if you turn the setting on and off, which is that you see quite a noticeable difference in the appearance of those games. If you look at 2D elements like UI and text, they actually look quite 4K now. Text is a lot sharper. 3D content is also altered considerably, like in a game like Destiny, where the aliasing artifacts in the original have been smoothed a little bit. The lines
Tem uma
look clear.
Aqui tem, ó. Tem uma diferença.
It has anti-aliasing that's being performed in a 4K pixel
Agora
grid,
vale,
so it
pô.
kind of aligns with a 4K pixel grid there. So it looks a bit cleaner. But when you do resolution counts, you quickly realize, like, okay, this is a filter because
filtro,
the base game
filtro.
content is still being rendered at the same resolution. You're not getting
Nada de
any kind of
Bloodborne em
additional
4K.
grunt there. You're really getting a post-process filter, it appears like. The issue is that it doesn't really do anything for temporal aliasing, given that it's probably working on a single frame as input. As a post-process, it gets tripped up pretty easily by post-processing. So if you have like chromatic aberration, it doesn't really know what to do with that. If you have film grain, like I played The Order, and it just doesn't really know what to do with it, so it doesn't do too much, it seems like, because there's film grain all over the image. It also doesn't seem to apply to games that output above 1080p. So like in Overwatch 2, for instance, that's a 1080p game, but the UI is 4K. It doesn't apply at all. So I think it's a good idea. I think it's cool. I have done some comparisons that I'll go into in a standalone video with LS1, which is a lossless scaling machine learning algorithm. I've also done some comparisons with FSR, with the RTX super resolution that's available on NVIDIA GPUs. And it is kind of comparable to those solutions, I would say. It's giving you a better image in a lot of respects. It can give you a noticeable improvement, but it's not going to be a game-changing improvement. It's not going to be like the LSS or PSSR for that matter, or FSR2 or any of these other solutions that can do so much with so many more inputs, obviously, than a simple post.
Cara, quem tá no PC vai saber o que eu tô falando aqui agora. É como se tu jogasse aquele... Oh, Deus. Ah, cara. Porra, eu ligo essa porra em todo jogo. Eu esqueci o negócio. Pô, vocês vão me lembrar aí. É o nome do programa. Que você bota ali. Reshade. É como se você botasse um reshade e você jogasse aquele negócio que aumenta a nitidez da AMD. Tá ligado? Ele tá basicamente fazendo um reshadezinho de nitidez. Mas não tá melhorando... Não é uma melhoria que você vai ver... Não é uma melhoria que vai mudar a tua experiência do bagulho.
Process filter could glean from a PS4 software. So I think it's a cool idea, but at the moment it's kind of a nice to have feature. Don't buy a PS5 Pro for this. So basically the takeaway. But it's nice to have it. It's nice to see Sony caring about this stuff, and I think it is kind of cool
e aí
for
fez
these
uma
older
diferença
PS4
legal, dá pra
titles in
notar
particular,
uma diferença.
where they can't take advantage
assim,
of PS5 Pro very well
nada demais,
normally,
né?
right?
Aqui
we
também
can go
fez,
back
legal.
and we can maybe get a post-process enhancement that could run on the GPU there that could be nice.
Cool. John, you gave it a go as well, right?
Yeah, a couple thoughts I have. I really like what it does for 2D elements, like user interface, text, fonts. It makes them genuinely look like there is additional detail being resolved. It's not just
Mínimo
like
demais pra
an
um console bem
upscale
caro,
or
inacreditável.
sharpening.
Foi
There is
mínimo
actually some
demais,
additional
cara.
detail there,
Comparado
which is
com o que a
really nice.
Microsoft faz com o game boost dela, pô, isso aí não é nada, né?
Interfere with the image quality there, and thankfully it does not.
Cool.
It actually produces, so it actually works well. For 1080p pixel art games, normally the PS5 would upscale it to 4K based on your output, and you would just get kind of a softer scale, right? So it makes the pixel art look a little bit softer than it probably should. With this feature enabled, it actually makes it look noticeably correctly scaled and sharpened without really adding noticeable artifacts to it, which is what I was worried about, given the different direction that they go with that kind of art. So that's a positive as well.
Okay,
So 3D stuff, though, it's like you said, Oliver, not game-changing, but interesting.
Yeah, like for instance in Bloodborne, which is a game that has a ton of chromatic aberration
Ah, o Bloodborne.
and lots of aliasing, it kind of doesn't do much for the 3D content. But you look at the UI.
Bloodborne, ele falou que é uma das coisas
and it's
que...
like,
um dos
wow,
jogos que menos dá pra ver o
this is
efeito
like
do
almost
negócio.
4K native UI. Like it looks really good, and it is creating detail in that text in particular that you would not see with like
Só na
something like
interface.
FSR1. It's quite compelling in that instance. But it's kind of, you know, some games it's compelling, other games it's not. You know, most of the time it's like nice to have, but not essential to have, essentially.
Exactly.
Well, I'm going to look forward to your full video on that one, Oliver. But let's move on. Okay, then. So one of the key features of PlayStation 5 Professional is the fact that your existing PlayStation 5 games should, in theory, run better thanks to the Game Boost feature. So I had the pleasure of testing Game Boost, which we can now confirm.
Então, só pra falar assim, o Game Boost é pra jogo que não tem patch, tá? Não tem um patch do Pro. Vamos ver como é que vai ficar.
The full power, or something close to it, of the PlayStation 5 Pro to non-Pro games. They run faster. And we all know which game we had to test first, Elden Ring.
Elden Ring.
Using the quality mode
60
here,
FPS?
which runs at a fixed 4K with fixed quality settings. Both of those elements are kind of dynamic in the performance mode, but we'll get onto that shortly.
Finalmente, 60 FPS?
So this is
modo
good
qualidade?
for like comparisons, to get some sort of grip on the performance differential. So here's the thing, you won't get a locked 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5 in PlayStation 5 Pro, rather, in quality mode. But you should comfortably remain within the 48 to 60 FPS VRR window for most play. Looking at the comparisons here, I've added real-time performance differentials expressed as percentages.
Pô, e vamos falar, vamos vocalizar a minha descontentação de não ter um patchzinho pro Pro, né? Pro Elden Ring. Pô, se o Elden Ring usasse o PSSR e tal, pelo amor de Deus.
But when the game does run at 60, obviously the GPU is underutilized, so the percentage will be lower. It's in areas of gameplay where the Pro is under 60 that you should see how much extra performance the Pro gives. Seems to max out at around 35%, a typical 30 to 35% delta.
30-35% de melhoria.
In quality mode.
Mas ainda não é o ideal,
frame
né?
rate mode, dynamic resolution, dynamic features. It should be locked to 60 easily, but it's not. So I'm guessing possibly the game's DRS system doesn't quite know what to do with the horsepower. There's also the possibility that we're CPU limited in some respect.
Porque não tem patch?
VR
Porque a From não
will
quis, mano.
smooth this out. So the Pro
Essa é verdade.
still the best place to play on consoles.
Eu tenho uma 4070 FPS no PC do Elden Ring. A From...
You gave this a go, didn't you, John?
Foda, cara.
Yeah, because this is a game that I played through on Xbox Series X. That was previously the best place to play it because of the wider VRR window, but obviously it regularly falls into the 40s. The PS5 Pro essentially solves that completely.
Qual a dificuldade de cravar essa caceta em 45 FPS? Cara, tinha que cravar 40, né? Tinha que ter modo 40 FPS
in the
pra ter
VR
120
range
Hz.
pretty much all the time. So it's very smooth, and that's the mode I use on Xbox. And that PS5 also gets per object motion blur, which looks really good, which the Xbox version doesn't seem to use in that mode for some reason. And then what surprised me was that the quality mode is actually very usable now, and that runs better than performance mode on Xbox. And you get it now mostly stays in the VRR window, not 100% as your values show, but it's close, and it's usually in the 50s, and it's a noticeable boost in sort of like clarity, and it's still fluid. So I thought that was a huge improvement in my experience, and I kind of want to dig back into it because I did not play the DLC yet. But that means I gotta kind of start over and play through on PS5. I bought a physical copy in Japan and gonna go through
Tem que
it.
instalar a versão do PS4 no PS5 pra rodar 60, intancável. Verdade, por enquanto se mantém a versão com melhor performance, né?
Quality mode settings equivalents, basically. Or as close as we can get to it. Up against the PS5 and the PS5 Pro. So fixed 4K there. Fixed settings. I'm using an RX 6800 here, as many believe it offers pro-level performance. The thing is, though, the 6800, there are PC-style stutters throughout, but in terms of actual gameplay, it's way, way, way smoother. So I'm going to be interested to do more sort of quality comparisons, performance comparisons between various PC parts and the Pro.
Vocês entenderam o que ele falou aqui? Ele falou que ele montou um PC mais ou menos o mesmo poder do PlayStation 5 Pro e o resultado é que tá mais suave. Ou seja, eu acho, cara, se a From quisesse fazer um patchzinho pro Pro, ela conseguia deixar em 60 FPS estável no modo qualidade. Se ela quisesse fazer um patchzinho, eu acho que ia ficar.
Real world performance. Right now, all of the sort of conjecture about the performance of the PlayStation 5 Pro has been based on Sony's statement that it's 45% faster, but certainly
Qual é a RX? É a 6800.
It rarely gets there. I was also curious
Olha aqui a
about
diferença aí.
ray
Porra.
tracing support on the Pro and whether Game Boost taps into the extra features, because the Pro has extra RT features, right? I was curious if the backwards compatibility would kick in with those features, similar to the way it does on a PC, but I don't think it does.
O Tio tá
So I'm
quase
using
implorando
control in
pra
photo
From.
mode
Cara, eu que
here.
acompanho a Digital Foundry, mano, eles pegam no pé da From de propósito, porque é um absurdo, né, mano? O que a From vende com jogos dela, principalmente agora com Elden Ring, né? Que vendeu agora com Elden Ring. Pô, dá pra eles investirem em ter uma prestação tecnológica melhor, né? Nem que seja, tipo assim, não precisa ser fazer mais bonito, mas deixar mais estável, né? É absurdo.
Here, which unlocks frame rate, and of course, we have returned to the corridor of doom. The first comparison seems to offer a performance boost in the region of about 31%, kind of similar to the Elden Ring boosts. The following scene, again from the Corridor of Doom, 33% boost
Então,
overall.
de novo, a melhoria de mais
Also
ou
did a
menos uns
couple of
30 e
scenes
poucos por
outside the
cento.
corridor, which are lighter. The Pro can run faster, still similar differentials overall, 33%. So back compat can't tie into the extra RT features of the Pro as far as I know. It just taps into the raw performance. Yeah, so that's quite interesting. I mean, it's great, but it has its limitations. But I think there's genuine application in the 120 hertz mode. Devil May Cry here,
Opa!
special edition. You can unlock the game to run in 120 hertz mode. I'm using, first of all, graphics mode with ray tracing, which essentially removes...
Isso aqui, nossa, não tinha nem pensado nisso, né? O Devil May Cry, ele realmente é um jogo que ele foi uma parada de tipo assim, toma esses modos aí, se roda bem atualmente, foda-se, né? Então, tipo, dá pra você ligar no modo gráfico e ligar o Ray Tracing e deixar a frame rate destravada. E Deus que se vire, né? Então isso é legal, que deu pra chegar aqui, ó, mais de 60 FPS.
limit, so we always have that differential there. I tried the intro in graphics mode. Very similar performance increases overall, but there are some instances where it does seem to go higher than that 35% threshold. Maybe it's the sampling rate on my performance comparisons
Pô, isso aí,
there,
locando a 60 fica maravilhoso.
mode, but who knows? In performance mode, though, still with RT enabled, the differentials can go higher. But I think the key point here really is that with VRR performance RT mode, you're just getting a better high frame rate gameplay experience. I think you'd agree with that, right, John?
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is really important too, because this is one of those weird games that never received a PC update, right? It's only Devil May Cry 5 Standard Edition on PC without the ray tracing. And because of the performance demands of this game, DMC5 SE was never really possible to really enjoy the ray tracing mode, I felt. You had to settle for not a great frame rate if you wanted decent looking ray tracing. Finally, it feels like it runs the way you would expect. And I found the quality mode with ray tracing in
Olha,
VR
o zoom, cara,
be...
eles jogarem em zoom é obrigatório. Eu já fiz pesquisas, já vi outras pessoas fazendo pesquisas também. Mais da metade das pessoas que assistem YouTube, eles assistem no celular. Então, como você vai mostrar pra uma pessoa a diferença de um jogo 4K que você joga numa TV, joga no monitor, numa telinha desse tamanho? Você tem que dar zoom. Eles já explicaram que é por isso que eles fazem.
Absolutely excellent as a result. It stays pretty much above 60 by and large, and it just feels responsive and it looks great. And it's kind of become like the best looking way to play DMC5 now, which, by the way, it's still a stunning looking game.
Opa, valeu, Magrini!
Rapaz, 16 terafarads é um baita banho de água fria.
O Teraflops? Cara, inclusive, tá rolando uma discussão, né, sobre isso, né, de que a contagem de teraflops hoje, será que ela é representativa, né? Porque a gente tá vendo, assim, coisas que, tipo, aumenta o teraflop, mas o aumento no teraflop não significa que vai ter essa diferença que a gente tem, ele não é representado dentro do jogo, né? Então é muita coisa que vem junto a isso, né? É a tecnologia que você vai implementar. Então, por exemplo, aqui ele tem machine learning. Esse machine learning tá fazendo diferença? Quanto que ele puxa dos teraflops que tá ali? Então, hoje é bem difícil a gente medir a performance da parada só por teraflops, sacou?
Oliver, do you have any thoughts on Game Boost? Did you give it a go?
I did give Game Boost a go, and the first protocol for me was Metaphor Fantasio.
Putz, esse jogo!
Game,
Puf, obrigado!
Kind of infamously
Nossa, vamos ver se teve alguma
does
melhoria.
not run at anything like a stable frame rate on PlayStation 5 consoles, on Xbox Series consoles,
Fora a
basically on
performance
anything.
gráfica também.
Almost.
Esse jogo tinha que ter um patch
It
pra
runs
usar o
at
PSCR.
1656p and it's like 40 to 60 FPS-ish on PS5. It's not a good experience. Totally like unlocked frame rate. It also has a 120 hertz mode, which again does not work well because the game dips even below the VRR window on PlayStation 5 quite frequently. I speculated in my video last month that PS5 Pro would basically fix it. And lo and behold, it has. It's basically a locked 60 FPS now.
Não acredito.
very
Acabou, clã. Vou comprar um PlayStation 5 Pro hoje. Não vou esperar o Peter trazer o meu pra jogar o Metaforce 60. Brincadeira.
Experience,
Mas,
even in
porra,
areas
mano.
where the base console was really struggling.
Precisou de um PlayStation 5 Pro pra rodar esse jogo em
At
60,
the
velho.
worst I saw was in a spot where the base console is like 44 FPS, 43 FPS. PS5 Pro was like 55, 56, 57. And that's like a pretty extreme scenario. So even without VRR, this game is totally saved. Great experience. And this is like probably the most challenged recent release I've seen on the consoles in terms of hitting a consistent frame rate. And it is obviously a very popular game now. Lots of people are playing it. And I think it's just about perfect now on PS5 Pro. So
Tá falando pra ser
if you
horrível,
get
porque
the most
essa merda no
powerful
PC
console in
tá
the world, you can
perfeito,
have
cara.
a
No
game that
PC a
looks
gente, pô,
about 10
pode
years
tacar o
to
gráfico pra
date.
cima, né?
You're gonna get a stable 60 FPS on a console if you spend $700 on a console. That's pretty extraordinary. I also tried out a couple other games. One other game I tried out was FF16.
E aí?
Unlocked in its
E
performance
aí?
mode most of the time, much of the time, except in combat.
Não, cara, não, peraí. Eu tenho que bater palma pra Digital Foundry, mano. Como é que, pô... São esses jogos que a gente quer ver, pô.
That obviously weird behavior there. I did not play too much, but Pro unfortunately does not deliver a locked 60 FPS. It's like in the 50s a lot. I think there what might be happening is the dynamic res is just kicking in and it's not load balancing in a way that we would like probably, because it does have a dynamic resolution system. So it's kind of like there are some positives here, big positives with the boost potentially.
Esse jogo não
And
ter
it
um
does
patch
apply, by
também é
the
um
way, to
crime,
all
né?
games. There's no way to turn it off. It's just always using the whole GPU. That's important to note. There's no like PS4 Pro style game enhancement might break your games. In this case, they're just applying it to all games, it seems like. I think that even though it isn't like a gigantic improvement in some titles, because of dynamic res, because of VRR and lots of titles with unlocked modes, because of the occasional odd title like Metaphor Fantasio that's just like running in a slightly messed up manner, I think that there are probably a lot of examples here, and we're probably just scratching the surface a little bit of what can be done with this. But yeah, I think there are a lot of games probably that will get decent enhancements from Game Boost, and that will really help people with like big libraries play older titles, that especially that might have VRR modes, you know, those unlocked VRR modes in lots of games. They don't run so well necessarily on base PS5. Maybe they'll run quite a bit better on PS5 Pro.
I have a few.
Bom, infelizmente, meus queridos, o Final Fantasy XVI continua não atingindo os 60 FPS, nem no Pro, mas ele não tem patch. Será que com um patch ele corrigiria isso? Ele tá só na força bruta, né, do Game Boost.
More to chime in as well here very briefly. Silent Hill 2 benefits
Opa!
that may receive a patch, actually, I'm not sure,
Tem que
but
ter patch, cara.
that essentially eliminates the stuttering issues that I noticed. It smooths out both performance and quality mode. So performance mode is now mostly 60 with a couple of little dips here and there, but VRR smooths that out, but it's very close.
Mostra a imagem.
The 30 FPS mode on base PS4 actually had a lot of slowdown, which was extremely shocking. Anytime you would be attacked by certain enemies, and that is also eliminated, as well as the running around stutters that it suffered from. It's just a lot more consistent. Silent Hill, the short message, that little hexadrive free.
Tá, ele não capturou a imagem, mas ele falou que agora o Silent Hill 2 ele tá a 60 FPS. Eu gostaria de ver aquela parte da piscina, tá ligado? Pô, a parte da piscina, o negócio cai ali bolado, meu amigo, bolado. O Silent Hill, inclusive, foi um jogo que eu joguei no PlayStation 5 no modo qualidade, porque o modo performance tava inconstante, né? Então eu gostaria de ver eles dando uma olhada pra ver como é que fica.
Silent Hill experience also fixed now, runs at 60 FPS.
Ele recebeu um patch?
Properly,
Pô, graças a Deus.
whereas before it was extremely unstable.
Precisamos ver.
So that's a huge improvement there. Suicide Squad I randomly tested, and I didn't spend too much time with it, but it seemed to those sort of skips and stutters and dips that I saw in the city have largely been cleaned up, but maybe they're also cleaned up on the base system, but it definitely felt better in my experience. Then there's three others to quickly mention. Ghostwire Tokyo it gets much closer, but not locked to by any means the 120 hertz output. So you can play that game in 120 hertz mode, and it actually allows the frame rate to be uncapped. And in the quality mode now, you're getting mostly north of 60. And the performance mode is north of 100, I believe. So it is noticeably smoother, which is interesting, but it still has some weird little like hiccups and stutters, which the game has always suffered from. So it did not fully fix it, but it is smoother. Armored Core 6 as well.
Ui, cessaram 20 mil
From
jogos,
software joint. It ran better than Elden Ring
né?
ever did, but it still had dips on actual on the regular PS5. It's cleaned up in my experience. That was my game of the year when it came out last year, I guess, and it's freaking awesome. And now it's actually quite a bit better on PS5. Lastly, GT7's patch hasn't launched yet, and I decided to try it out. And what was interesting about this now is you can run it at native 4K mode in the 120 hertz mode, and now it achieves a completely locked 120 FPS playback in native 4K mode, which...
Eles falaram uma coisa interessante. O Gran Turismo ele tá marcado como um dos jogos que vai ter suporte ao lançamento. Mas eles falaram que no momento que eles testaram lá não tinha. Valeu, Magrini!
O que me pega é que a 3060 Ti tem 16 terafarads e é uma placa de 2K, além de ter o DLSS, que é bem mais estabelecido.
E é bem melhor do que o PSR.
E o Xbox Series X tem 12.
Então, por exemplo, se a gente for comparar placa de vídeo e placa de vídeo, né? Você pegar uma placa de vídeo da AMD, por exemplo, ela não tem um DLSS, né? Então, às vezes, você pode pegar uma placa de vídeo da AMD que tem mais teraflops do que a placa de vídeo da NVIDIA, mas a NVIDIA ela vai conseguir te entregar uma imagem melhor, mesmo tendo menos número de teraflop. Então, por isso que hoje o teraflop é complicadíssimo, né? Você determinar a performance por ela, apenas por ela. Fora a questão de otimização, né? O console, normalmente, eles têm uma... Alguns jogos eles fazem até uma configuração que não existe no PC, para que eles consigam fazer uma versão otimizada para o console, para a fraqueza que tem ali na configuração do console. Então, teraflop é muito complicado, mano, hoje em dia.
Previously, it was in like the 80 to 90 FPS range with the uncapped VRR mode. Now it's just flat 120. You also get 120 FPS replays, which
Excellent.
There can be tiny little dips here and there, but like I've never seen replays this smooth in GT before, so it's quite a treat. And weirdly, I would assume that these options might go away once it's patched. So
Right.
we'll see what happens.
A mídia tem o FSR, mas eu não gosto dele. Não, FSR...
You do seem to be getting the full power of the PlayStation 5 Professional deployed on older
O
games.
upscaling da Epic
But that does
tá
raise
melhor
the
do que o
question
FSR
of
hoje em
the
dia.
45% extra raster performance, because I don't think you're getting that level. Question is whether that applies to pro level games or whether there's some restrictions in place that apply to game boosts, so maybe you're not getting the full performance level. I think ultimately, if you look at your base PlayStation 5, increase the frame rate in GPU limited situations, we'll talk about CPU limited a bit later, then apply that 30% to the frame rate number you have, and that's pretty much what the Pro will give you. And if it gets you to 60, great, but it's not a given. Not every game is going to get to 60. But I'd say it's certainly a very, very interesting feature nonetheless. Something I didn't have time to test that much. You would expect games that are locked at a particular target performance level, 30 or 60, but are using dynamic resolution. You would expect the image quality to be cleaned up. I tried it on Metro Exodus, actually. I didn't actually see a massive difference there, but, mileage will vary on a title-to-title basis. But more to come on Game Boost. We want to check it out with some other titles. But let's move on.
Vamos lá.
So now we're going to move on to...
Então, agora... Pô, legal, eles se dividiram bem aqui a parada. Isso foi tudo jogo que não tem suporte, tá? Até agora a gente viu essa seção que o jogo não tem suporte. Agora eles vão entrar em jogo que geralmente ele tá travado, né? Pela CPU. A expectativa é que não tenha nenhuma melhora, porque a CPU manteve-se a mesma do PlayStation 5 base, só que com um leve overclock. Então a diferença deve ser mínima, hein? Vamos ver.
Actual game performance and what the new features of the PlayStation 5 Professional mean for all of that. And we're going to kick off with the element that's probably most contentious about it, which is the fact that the CPU isn't really changed at all from the base PlayStation 5. This is slightly problematic because we have found a number of games where there are CPU limitations. I'm going to quickly cycle back to Game Boost first of all, because there's actually a mode on PlayStation 5 Pro where developers can actually opt in to having 10% extra CPU clock.
É o que eu te falei
And
agora.
that comes at the expense of a little bit of GPU performance. So I tested it in Cyberpunk 2077, which hasn't been patched, but this is the classic Cherry Blossom Marketplace run. It's not quite fully synchronized here, but you can definitely see what's happening. Running around that marketplace in a circle, the frame rate dips beneath 60 frames per second, and the dip is considerably more pronounced on the base model. Still not quite 60 on the Pro model though, but you can look at the performance differentials there, and it's exactly in line with what you would expect from an extra 10% of CPU
É, ele
clock.
falou que tem 10% de mais de clock, a gente tá
we
vendo a
can
melhoria
confirm
de
that
mais
Game
ou menos
Boost
10%
isn't
também.
just boosting graphics performance, you are getting that 10% of
Isso
extra
quando sobe até
CPU
mais, né?
clock.
16 às vezes.
The other test I did, and this one is for a Pro enhanced game, and that is Baldur's Gate 3, the classic city run.
Opa!
Act 3, we've got a save that's like 100 hours in, and we can actually do a run through the city. And you can see that on the left there, the base PlayStation 5, on the right is the Pro enhanced version of the game. We're still CPU limited, and you'll see that similar to Cyberpunk, the performance differentials are again in line with a modest bump to CPU
Aí não é
clock.
quase nada.
So, Oliver, I think this is probably the primary limitation. I mean, a lot of people are looking at PlayStation 5 Pro thinking, you know, should I give up my PC or you know, should I stick with PlayStation and not move to PC? And I think the defining limitation of the Pro, which we've got to accept, is that even mainstream CPU performance now in the PC space is significantly better than the Zen 2 in the PlayStation 5 Pro. So you've kind of got to accept that limitation with the Pro, right?
Engraçado, tipo assim, o Baldur's Gate 3 ele teve patch, né? O que teve nesse patch? Foi só pra habilitar esse Game Boost aí, que é fazer 10%? Que eu tô olhando aqui pra um lado e pro outro, né? Os dois são no modo performance, eu não tô vendo nenhuma diferença, né? Graficamente falando, dos dois.
Yeah, I mean, this is a mid-gen refresh console, so the emphasis is obviously not on some of those more kind of fundamental areas of the console design, I would say, like the CPU. But here, I mean, right now, high-end PC CPUs are about twice as fast as the PlayStation 5 Pro's CPU. But I think what we're seeing in most titles nowadays that target console hardware is that basically they are mostly delivering 60 FPS. Like, I don't think we're in quite a cataclysm of games that are failing to hit their performance targets on console. I think most games are basically there, plus or minus some stutters and issues like that.
Pô,
But obviously in titles like Baldur's Gate,
temos visto
obviously
jogos
in
perregando,
some more
assim.
CPU limited games, like you mentioned with Cyberpunk in certain areas, you do run into some problems, and there the PS5 Pro will not save you. It might be good for an extra 10% of performance, but it's not going to. It's not
Esses
going to
10%
save
nem
your
dá pra falar que
performance.
fez alguma
It's not going
diferença,
to be
mano.
that kind of generational leap in
Nem dá pra
CPU
notar.
performance that would actually fix those problems.
Yeah.
But the 10% is nice. I mean, it's nice to have something at least.
Absolutely. Games that are
Tangencial,
slightly
I
off their
think.
performance targets due to CPU limits
Yeah.
will see a boost there. And, you know, I honestly think that you should be running a VRR capable display if you can afford a $700 console. Okay, let's move on. Another aspect of the PlayStation 5 Professional that is one of the key selling points, I guess, well, there's the big three, right? And one of those big three is enhanced ray tracing support. John, you've been looking at some games, and ray tracing support has indeed been enhanced on a range of titles. What caught your eye?
Well, obviously, the first ones I wanted to check out was the Insomniac group. I'm actually working on a full video for that, so I don't want to go into too much detail here, but Spider-Man 2 is the one that received the most. And I think what I found is that the improvements are nice, but relatively subtle.
Aham.
And it feels like you can tell that the game wasn't necessarily arted up with this in mind from the beginning, but essentially it means things like, for instance, what they call the key light shadows. It's actually the sun shadows. It simply allows distant buildings and structures to properly cast shadows on themselves, which previously you
A
didn't
rua
get
tá com
at a
pouquinho mais de
distance.
sombra, mas
There's
assim...
also improved RTAO, which, as expected, adds
Mas assim, né?
occlusion shadows in spots where there previously were none, or where it was more generalized and kind of fuzzy with the solution they had in place, so that's more accurate. There's also a screen space GI pass, which I will show in more detail in the video. It's a minor thing, but it's there. This feels like Insomniac essentially like going back and adding some additional things that are kind of cool, but they don't radically alter the game's visuals. When we get to the PSSR stuff, perhaps there's a little bit more to say, because I think that's more effective in terms of what it does to the image quality.
Yeah.
Será que a Microsoft lançar um Super Series X e S? Eles já falaram que não, mano. Não vão ter um mid-gen.
And I think Oliver's played some of them as well. One of them I wanted to note, because this is a weird one. So it's Dragon's Dogma 2, right? This one has all sorts of weirdness going on, and we got to figure out how we're going to talk in more detail about this. But in the daytime, the RT with PSSR enabled has like a weird splotchiness to it. It feels very unstable in a way. I think you mentioned this in your impressions before, Oliver, where it doesn't look quite right.
Anytime you move the camera, you just kind of create these huge patchy holes in the RTGI.
Right.
It's most obvious in the performance PSSR mode, but it is present across all the PSSR modes. And I checked this against the game on PS5 here, and it's not nearly as apparent there. There is some lag to the RTGI, but it's not nearly as apparent as with PSSR. But the upside, I guess, of this, if you can call it that, is if you do want to turn off RT, it completely disappears, this issue. But it's really distracting. I think it's kind of broken looking. I pointed it out to the Capcom reps when I was looking at it 2 months ago. And I said, this is not right? And they kind of looked at me like I was speaking Spanish. So I don't know if it'll get fixed, but it is an issue still in this launch code, unfortunately.
Talvez depois eles corrigem.
It is annoying,
e se dá pra corrigir com patch.
Agreed.
Mas e a performance?
Any other games you want to bring up, Oliver? You've looked at Alan Wake quickly, haven't you? That's got a 30 FPS RT mode.
I have looked at Alan Wake. Alan Wake gets RT reflections in its quality mode. They look really excellent. They add a lot of depth to the game. They fix a lot of issues with SSR that can be really unflattering when SSR is off screen, or even when it's on screen, because it has a kind of grain to it on PlayStation 5.
Queria ter visto mais
and other
Dragon's Dogma.
consoles that I do not like too much. It's probably the effect from the PC version, the RT effect, that makes the biggest impact on the visuals. So it's nice to see it on Pro. They're bringing over the most impactful piece of RT tech over to the consoles there. In terms of other games, I played a little bit of F1 24, like we saw from Tom's preview and from my impressions at the PlayStation event a couple months ago. They're getting RTAO and RT reflections on top of DDGI, adding a ton of lighting detail into the game that would probably be very expensive on base PS5. Only compromises image quality, not perfect. It does look very 4K-like, but there is some breakup in it, especially on like fine geometric elements with subpixel detail like fences and things like that. Not perfect, but still a pretty good upgrade overall. Adding 2 RT effects on top of the PlayStation 5 feature set there. Also in Hogwarts Legacy, unfortunately, Hogwarts Legacy's patch is not live.
Aí, outro jogo também que não
good, but I do want to see more of that no when it does get the final patch there.
Same with GT7.
There's also GT7, of course. Yeah, GT7, we don't have the patch yet, but it should look quite compelling, I think. But there are some that are a little bit less successful, like
isso é meio foda, né? Já que a Sony mandou pra galera poder testar, ela devia ter que falar assim, o patch do PlayStation 5 Pro tem que sair até dia tal, né? Que seria o dia que eles iam mandar. Estranho, né?
Where they add RTAO to the performance mode, which doesn't add too much to the visuals, I think, and it also has some negative impacts on image quality that we can discuss a little bit later. But it seems to push performance, in particular, down below 60 FPS quite often, which I think is a byproduct of the CPU cost, which Alex noted, I believe, in his impressions, that on an RX, on a 3600 rather, that it would potentially drop below 60 FPS with some of those RT features enabled. So I think that's possibly what we're seeing there, which is not a super positive development relative to the base console. But I think the early results are really promising. I think Formula 1 is a highlight. I think Hogwarts Legacy will probably be a highlight. I think the Insomniac games are cool, what they're doing there.
Deve ter vários patch atrasados,
probably with the PS5 Pro, like,
e eu espero que mais jogos antigos ganhem patch também, né? Tipo Final Fantasy XVI que a gente falou e tal.
And I think that's a pretty cool thing. You know, I think that's pretty cool. And possibly developers could do more extensive things with it in the future. But so far, I think from like F1, we can see developers can really push out ray tracing on the console. Just that we need more developers to follow in their lead, I suppose.
Yeah, I was really impressed with F1, to be honest. the feature set that they've got in there is really impressive. The performance is good as well. Some other notes about F1 I'll talk about later, particularly when it comes to power draw, which is quite amusing. Yeah, I think my takeaway from this is that third-party wise, we're kind of seeing effects that are present on PC kind of being ported across to PlayStation 5 Pro, which is a good thing. But I'm really looking forward to the time where maybe the first-party studios are actually targeting the hardware specifically. Everything we've seen from Sony thus far is essentially retrofits, right? And I'm looking forward to seeing what they actually do when they're specifically targeting the Pro. Right, okay, let's move on. Let's talk about PSSR, the AI-based upscaling solution. I'm not sure how much we can actually add to the coverage we've already done with Ratchet & Clank and The Last of Us Part 2. That was during the pre-release period.
Parece que só não conversei nem um pouco com os devs. O papo de não escolher o modo foi balela e os patches não saíram. Pode crer. Eu acho que eles tinham que ter um incentivo, né, pros devs. Mostrarem material de marketing e tal. Isso é um marketing gratuito pro dev, né?
The success of PSSR basically changes the success level, the quality level, if you like, changes on an implementation based basis from one title to the next. John, you got any notes about PSSR in the games you've tested?
Oh boy, do I, Rich. There are some huge improvements here.
Esse eu sou rico porque o nome do cara é Rich, né?
FF7 Rebirth is arguably the largest one, but we'll get to that. But the one that surprised me that hasn't been talked about yet is Stellar Blade.
Alguém testou Stellar Blade, graças a Deus.
Its original display modes have what I would say is relatively poor TAA implementation with a lot of noise, shimmering, sparkle. If you just stand still and look at the image, you actually see this noise in motion, and it does not look good. And I talked about this in my original video. Only the balanced mode was okay, but even that was somewhat noisy. So for the PS5 Pro patch, they've actually added 2 modes. One of them I think is very strange. The other one is amazing. So the amazing one uses PSSR instead of the prior TAA solution. And it also unlocks a high frame rate mode, which relies on VRR. And this one's that's a little bit weird because it does switch to 120 hertz output, but it seems to essentially cap itself at 80 frames per second, which they specify in their update text is like, you can enjoy it at 80 frames per second. So the game runs at 80 FPS then with VRR then. So it does feel noticeably smoother. It's just, I feel like it could possibly go higher. Cutscenes though are always limited to 60, so they come back down.
But either way, 60,
80, it is very nice looking now on a good screen. That is for sure. And if you're not on a VR screen, you just get 60 FPS, right? Now, PSSR though, my goodness, it completely changes the image and it just resolves so much more detail and cleans up so much noise. And it winds up massively improving the visuals overall, I would say. In what was a somewhat dirty looking game at times, it makes it look super smooth and clean. And it is a gigantic leap. It's probably the best implementation I've seen yet, just in terms of improving overall image quality, maybe, and stability. Stability is key. It's temporally stable now, whereas before it was not. Which is why the Pro Max mode, as they call it,
Pro Max,
taking one from Apple perhaps,
virou iPhone.
Is so strange. That one, with high frame rate mode engaged anyway, limits itself to 50 frames per second. And the way they describe this is essentially, this is the original version's quality mode, which was kept at 30 frames per second, but now it runs at 50 frames per second.
Pô, já tô vendo que esse modo é pior. Já tá olha lá a imagem tremulando, mano.
It uses the original TAA, but it's native 4K. But
o Pro Max é pior do que o Pro.
It's a lower internal res, the PSSR mode looks significantly better than the native 4K image with TAA.
Wow.
Like it really is. It just the detail, the resolution, the temporal stability, it's all improved.
Os coreanos viajaram, mano.
Like the Pro Max mode ends up being kind of useless because I think the image quality is...
O foda é que isso é contra-intuitivo, né? Você vai lá, você comprou seu PlayStation 5 Pro. Pô, aí tem um modo Pro Max. Porra, vou ligar esse modo, né? E vai ver o modo é pior.
Technically worse. Even
Roda
if the
pior
resolution is
e tem
higher,
imagem pior.
and it's capped at 50 frames per second if you're on HFR. Otherwise, it's just the 30 FPS quality mode on a non-VR 120 hertz screen. So there's weirdness there, but if you can use, I recommend the normal pro mode with PSSR. That's a game changer. Just like it was, we've talked about this before with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Again, seeing more areas in that, it makes such a difference. It is so much sharper and cleaner than the original version, and it runs very smooth now. I feel like even with the visual flaws the game has, it just feels much more coherent now, because the muddy, smeary look of the game originally.
Quem capturou essas imagens aí sabia o que tava fazendo, né?
Posso
pegar a imagem de qualquer parte do jogo. Qual parte que eu vou pegar?
Made the assets that didn't look good, it made them look a lot worse, and it did not elevate the good assets.
You fixated on them a bit.
Right. Yeah. You fixated on them. That's all gone now, and it just feels so much better as a result. So I really want to play through the game now, because it makes a difference. Another one, though, that I wanted to mention is actually Demon Souls, the remake from Bluepoint, which, again, in its original state, they had a 1440p mode at 60 and a native 4K mode at 30. And I think the PSSR mode, which is 60 FPS, looks better than both. You maybe get a little additional detail resolved in the native 4K mode, but there's much more stair-stepping aliasing within the surfaces, and just more visual noise. Like, it's less effective as a TAA. The TAA is less effective in that original 4K 30 mode. And as a result, the new PSSR mode, it's so much more temporally stable, and it resolves more detail in a way that I find much cleaner and more visually nice. I also discovered, I haven't played this game since launch. I loaded up my...
Ele tem que ser. Eu elogiei a Digital Foundry, mas tem que ser justo aqui. Eles cometeram a mesma coisa que, eu sei que os caras devem estar correndo ali, né? Eles testaram um jogo pra caralho. Mas eu gostaria que eles botassem a imagem anterior junto com a nova. Sabe? Pra ver mesmo a diferença.
The New Game Plus on my finished save. And boy, the New Game Plus mode or whatever, the second round is extremely hard. It is way harder than the normal game. Wow. So I didn't get that far in this because I only have this save here available. So it's that first area again, getting creamed by these enemies. But man, it sure looks good while it's happening.
Let's talk about a game that doesn't use PSSR but has insanely good image quality. Horizon Forbidden West, and I assume the Horizon Zero Dawn remaster as well.
Não deu tempo de fazer a edição antes da review, provavelmente não, mano.
Had a lot of great things to say about that based on
Mas eles devem fazer
time at
vídeo separado
event,
pra cada
right?
coisa.
But John, you've now spent some time with it on your home setup. What do you think?
I think they might have achieved arguably just about the best image quality I've seen in a console game.
Really?
It's so good. When you consider the density of the visuals, how much detail is in them, the way it resolves that detail and presents it is so clean and attractive that it's honestly mind-boggling. It looks really, really good. It feels like you're playing a high-end PC game now, using everything that you could throw at it from the PC side. That's the upgrade I feel here. It's stunning, and there's so much granular detail in the distance, the grass, the rocks, everything. It does not, I mean, the game is very visually busy, right? And this just does it justice in a way that the original modes did not, especially the original performance mode and even the updated performance mode. It's light years
no
beyond.
início, não sei se vocês lembram, eu até quando estava jogando aqui, né, eu postei a gameplay pra vocês. No início, o modo performance do Forbidden West, ele era muito serrilhado. Vocês lembram como é que tava? Eu lembro que até na hora que eu entrei, na hora que eu vi o matinho, eu falei assim, caralho, tá serrilhado pra caralho o matinho. Mas eles corrigiram relativamente rápido.
And yeah, I would say of all the titles we tested, this is the one that has the best image quality overall. There is weirdly still a quality mode that also uses this. And it is slightly better, I guess, but I really don't feel like it's necessary. The performance one is extremely close.
Gorilla told me all that does is like increase the dynamic res internally a little bit, but they also said that friends don't let friends play at 30 hertz.
Good. So they know now.
Yeah, they know it. I mean, the closest analog to me is something like DLSS, where the image is just like in games with good DLSS 2 implementations. It's just super smooth, super stable, handling varied content very well. Horizon is a game with quite challenging, I think, content possibly for these upscaling solutions. Has a lot of foliage, has hair, has a lot of complex movement when you're doing combat and stuff like that. Everything I threw at it, perfect. Just like looked awesome. Foliage looked great. Like the old, I thought the old checkerboard mostly looked fine, but again, you go back to that and you look at the foliage and it's like, no, it's not nearly as good as this.
Big upgrade.
It's a huge upgrade.
I thought it looked fine until I saw DLSS on the PC version, and side by side, lower resolutions via DLSS are looking better than the checkerboard solution on the PS5, but it looks as though that's been supremely addressed with this upgrade for the PlayStation 5 Pro.
Yes.
Here. Very, very good stuff.
I also just wanted to mention, because I did my own testing on PSSR, quite a bit of testing on PSSR, going through a bunch of games, a bit of a gauntlet of games. And yeah, I would say Horizon for sure is the peak of image quality on PlayStation 5 Professional at the moment, but that is not using PSSR. So I tried to do a deep dive into some of these other games, and I tested FF7R quite a bit, and I agree with John that is like definitely up there. I did not play Stellar Blade, unfortunately, but I think FF7R,
Pô, tá perdendo, mano.
that is a really impressive improvement there. Part of it is because the improvement in detail is quite outrageous, but also because it's delivering a very crisp, very sharp 4K image out of a base resolution that's like not super high. So it's like 1152p, 1224p-ish internally. It's doing that in the game with a pretty zoomed out third-person camera, a lot of action, and it's giving you a perfect rendition of action scenes with a lot of complex movement and particles. But it's not perfect, I would say. You can have some problems with specular aliasing. It can blur patches of foliage when you're just walking by. It can have some issues with foliage where it kind of appears overly noisy. Even on opaque edges, it's not 100% stable. It's not as stable as the old 4K mode in the graphics mode on the PlayStation 5 console. But it is a huge improvement. It is absolutely a huge improvement, and it is absolutely one of the best titles in that respect on PlayStation 5. Ratchet and Spider-Man, we've already covered a fair bit of Ratchet in particular. Those games look quite good. Again, higher internal rendering resolutions, look a little bit softer, some artifacting. Again, we've covered that. T-Loop Part 1 and 2, again, look great. A little bit more artifacting than their fidelity modes, but again, look pretty good. But then there are a few games where PSSR is not doing such a good job at the moment, and I wanted to bring these up. There are a couple that I did note, actually 3 that I noted, but we've already talked about Dragon's Dogma 2, and that game has some somewhat unique issues with reconstruction at the moment. One of them is Dragon Age the Veilguard. So in the performance mode, the grass in this shot just shimmers like crazy. They've added RTAO, which I suspect doesn't help. The internal resolution here is about 864p internally. That's what I counted it. Going up to roughly 1440p, it looks like in that performance mode, because it's not nearly as sharp as the fidelity mode is in this title. It's resolving quite poorly, and in motion, you get a lot of edges that are aliased, a lot of edges that look low resolution. There are some visual bugs as well, where the grass will pop out of existence for one frame and then come back the next, which is an odd issue that kept popping up. I hope they do take the time.
Tipo assim, dá pra gente ver que tá mais nítido, né? Só você olhar na textura do chão pra você ver como é que tá mais nítido. Mas ele não tá fazendo uma técnica de upscaling muito estável, né?
To fix
tá
that,
dando um monte de bugzinho.
Just, pre-release teething issues.
Bom, são coisas que dá pra corrigir com o patch, esses bugzinhos, mas assim, meio triste, né?
And the water, it's a very different looking SSR there, so it does not look very good. The old FSR2 Resolve did look a bit softer in motion, but it handled the foliage better, I would say. It handled the foliage quite a bit better. Okay. In the fidelity mode, there are some issues, but it looks a lot better than the performance mode. The other example of a game that I think is not quite there, and I will cover this in more detail, is Alan Wake 2. It can look very noisy in stills. Almost like you have a kind of film grain on, but you don't have film grain on. But it's just very, very...
Cara, e o foda, mano, é que eu acho que o Alan Wake, ele tem uma prestação tão soft, né, em qualquer um dos modos, até no modo qualidade, ele é tão soft que... Pô, tá no modo qualidade dos dois aqui, né, tanto do PS5 Pro quanto do PS5 normal. Ainda parece meio soft, né, mano?
Noisy, like in stills, like I have here. It's an issue in both the performance mode and the quality mode. PSSR, on the upside, PSSR definitely handles complex movement better than FSR2. Disocclusion is much less of an issue, but that noise is annoying.
Tá com
And it
menos
doesn't
ruído,
clean up a
então.
lot of the shimmer and aliasing during movement. Like a lot of the problems that we saw in FSR2 are still problems with PSSR in this title. You're still seeing that breakup. You're still seeing that aliasing. But
Mais
one
menos.
thing I will note in this title is a kind of PSA to anyone who is playing on PS5 Pro is that some of the game's image quality issues seem to stem from the fact that the game appears to be using lower res post-processing. So I wouldn't normally recommend this, but if you turn motion blur off in the settings,
Desligar o
the
motion blur?
appearance of aliasing in motion can be diminished quite a bit with motion blur off, especially on like fine specular highlights, little sub-pixel details. It can be improved quite a bit. So I
Cara, o Alan Wake é foda, mano. Desligar o motion blur deixa a imagem mais estável. Geralmente o motion blur, ele ajuda a você mascarar essas coisas, mano. Porque ele vai borrando, né? Que loucura, cara.
would recommend that possibly, especially in the performance mode where I don't really think that that motion blur is adding a lot, but it is actually giving you a lot of extra aliasing, which is weird. I also noticed the same behavior on the base PS5 with the FSR2 resolve there, but it was a little bit less of an issue in that title with FSR2. I think with PSSR, it is a bit more noticeable. So maybe turn off motion blur here, especially in that performance mode. The other thing I wanted to note with Alan Wake 2, which is a bit unfortunate, is that the performance in that 60 FPS mode, it wasn't perfect on PS5. It was pretty good. There were some sections that caused issues.
É.
On PS5 Pro, the performance is worse. In the forest area in particular, you're running in like the, upper 40s, low 50s at points. It's not amazing. I'd hope
A performance no Pro é pior. Ô, Remedy. Como assim, meu amigo? Velho, vamos ver.
that they could improve that as well. That is unfortunate to see a performance regression there. Again, they have improved a lot of visual settings from what I can tell, like a lot of the shadow settings. You can definitely notice that things have been bumped up there as well. Yeah, that could be
performance é
improved.
essa,
So I
cara?
think, to me, PSSR at the moment, I think it depends a lot on the game engine, the internal resolution, the output resolution, the presence of transparencies and how they're presented to PSSR potentially, the presence of ray tracing. I suspect that we're going to see a bit of a divergence in the quality of implementations, possibly. There might be some minimum threshold of resolution that
E eu lembro de eu falando assim, pô, a Remedy, pô, daria pra botar um Ray Tracing no modo performance, né? Pô, diminui um pouquinho a resolução. Mas bota um Ray Tracing... Agora eu tô vendo por que eles não botaram um Ray Tracing no modo performance. Tô vendo.
that's wise to clear with the technique at the moment, at least. And I think what I'm seeing broadly is that some of the third-party implementations are really good. Some are a little bit not as good, especially at lower input resolutions. And the Sony first-party stuff is universally good, all good, basically, to, pretty great. In the case of FF7R, which is not Sony first-party, but, is a closely developed game, I have to imagine. So that's my impression at the moment. PSSR, I think it's a good technique. I think it's doing a lot of good stuff in a lot of titles, but for sure, like some of these early implementations in those 3 games I highlighted, I would like to see some work done there to improve those for sure.
Okay, good stuff. Let's move on. Before
Coisa
we
boa.
talk about our final sort of verdict on the PlayStation 5 Pro, let's talk about power consumption, power testing. Okay, so we've got some new visualizations here. For the first time, we're able to map power consumption into our performance graphs, thanks to an assist
Tirou
from
uma
our
melecona ali que eu
valued
vi.
contributor Illusion. It's worth saying that the polling of the power meters like 1 sample per second, so it's not particularly
Ô, galera,
granular, but it gives you
pode...
the...
Cara, eles ficam muito tempo... Pode pular essa parte aqui? Vocês vão ficar coisa que, cara, eu sinceramente não ligo se ele estiver consumindo mais 20 watts. Não ligo. Pode pular, Clã? Mas, mano, eu tô um pouco chocado com o Alan Wake, velho. Eu tô um pouco chocado, cara. Ó, a pandemia falou pra pular. Antônio também. Pode. Então vamos lá, vamos pular. Vamos pular.
Much more power draw, which I think is a bit of a win. Okay,
Absolutely.
let's move on to final impressions, final verdict, so to speak. We can't get away from the fact that the PlayStation 5 Pro is an expensive piece of kit. It's $700 US, £700 in the UK.
E 7 mil reais no Brasil?
Ratchet up even more in Europe. I think partly because of the VAT side of things.
Europe and Japan are real bad.
Yep. And then you've basically, you know, if you are invested in the physical media, which a lot of the audience are going to be, bearing in mind, you know, who it's targeted at, you've basically got to buy that $80 optical drive. It's £100 in the UK.
E não se esqueça da base.
120 in Europe.
And then there's the whole concept of the stand that I paid £25
Olha lá, ele falou, ele lembrou. Ele lembrou da base.
Yeah, it's expensive. But, John, I would like your impressions first. Do you think this is like a luxury item? What's your takeaway here?
Com certeza.
Wow, that's an interesting question. I mean, clearly, when you look at the price point, yes, it is a luxury item for sure. More so than the PS4 Pro, I think, which was priced to essentially replace the base PS4, right? That's not the case here.
O preço do PS4 Pro foi bem agradável, mano.
You mentioned the disk drive MSRPs, but good luck getting one at the MSRP right now. They are exceptionally pricey online as a result of low stock. So I hope Sony can resolve that quickly enough. But there are things about it that are a little like...
O celular hoje vem...
People love in
só
the
com cabo,
unboxing
né?
the way you tore open that packaging like Hulk, right? It was funny, if a bit excessive. Problem is like for a product that costs north of 500 in every region at this price level, I really feel like they let people down in terms of the packaging. It doesn't really matter for the overall product, but like you expect something a little bit more premium, right? Like you can still have that Apple-like experience. I mean, Microsoft does it with the Xbox Series X, I would say, which feels very premium when you open that box. Like just having that flimsy cardboard sleeve and this like artery slicing plastic.
Vocês se importam com isso? Eu sei que tem gente igual eles ali, eles estão comentando, que realmente se importa, né? De ter uma experiência premium num unboxing. Meu irmão, por mim, cara, pode vir embalado. Eu não sei como é que o Peter vai trazer o meu Pro, mas pode vir embalado no plástico bolha, parceiro. O que importa depois é estar aqui.
The cardboard in there, it's very cheaply put together. And I don't buy sustainability arguments because Microsoft's packaging is also sustainable. They could have done better there. But ultimately, that's just that initial user experience, the first consumer moment of truth, as they say. So, and then when you get to the product itself, it's targeted towards people like us, I think, right? We have an eye for this stuff. We do appreciate those details.
Eu guardo todas as minhas caixas? Não, eu guardo também.
I think there is definitely going to be a
preço pra
subset of
revenda,
people
né?
that will not be able
Mas eu
to
digo,
spot
tipo, a
differences.
caixa,
There's
ela
not gonna
ser
be
mais
anything
premium,
major
tá
where
ligado?
they're
Ela
like,
vir
wow, this is a huge upgrade.
uma experiência mais bonita, tá ligado?
It has, so far, it has some nice improvements, but not game-changing improvements. But also, it's like, it kind of fixes problems in certain other games as well. So it's like a way to improve games that maybe had issues in the past, like Elden Ring, which is a weird, you can't really sell a product on that, but that is a thing that it does, which is nice. So I like it. I think it's a nice machine. I would want this either way, because I do play a lot of console games still. I think they've made some strange decisions with like the disk drive not being included.
Essa caixa de ovo é uma pica.
It lives up to that
Parece
pro
uma
name,
caixa
I
de
guess.
ovo mesmo.
If you feel like you are actually a console professional, as we are, then yeah, that's probably a good thing to go for. But if you're somebody that's not like super tuned into these things and don't really notice a lot of these flaws, or if you're using a much smaller or older TV, and you sit further away from it, I think that also influences things where you probably won't be able to see it. But if you're like me using a fairly big TV, I think Rich and I were both using 77-inch now.
Eu tenho uma na sala. O foda é que eu não consigo jogar na sala, né? Porque eu tenho que fazer gravação aqui. Mas eu tenho uma na sala, uma de 65, mano. Só que ela é LED, né? Ela não é OLED, ela é LCD normal. Então, cara, eu queria muito fazer um upgrade pra uma de 75 ou uma de 77, igual ele falou ali. OLED, mano. Eu tô pra te dizer, velho, que talvez tu fazer um upgrade da tua TV vai te dar uma experiência melhor do que tu dar o upgrade do Pro, hein? Talvez, dependendo da TV que você tem, né? Se você tiver, tipo, igual a minha TV, você quer botar uma TV que é maior e tem uma tecnologia melhor. Talvez, hein? Pô, um ponto legal pra se analisar, inclusive.
I sit rather close to it, so the benefit is extremely obvious to me. But yeah, those are the kinds of questions you need to think about.
Okay. Before I go to you, Oliver, I just want to say, John, that ripped cardboard recycles just as well as intact cardboard. And I don't need the box of my PS5 Pro. You know, I'm not going to sell it or anything. I'm not going to repackage it and put it into
julgando
storage.
ele porque ele rasgou a caixa, velho.
You know, it's not the sort of packaging, as you say, it's not high quality packaging that you want to keep forever.
No,
it's disposable.
Actually, there is one more point I want to mention for the betterment of the audience is the experience of getting the system and transferring your stuff over. If you do the system transfer, it is long, but there's a nice thing here that we have to mention. Actually, two nice things. If you take out the NVMe drive, if you installed an additional NVMe drive in your PS5, you can just transfer that to the Pro, and it will work.
Cool.
You don't need to re-download everything. The only caveat there is if you plug in your new PS5 Pro, start to download some games, then power it off, and then put the drive in there, and there's a duplicate, it will delete those duplicates from the NVMe, the ones that are already being installed or partially installed on the main system. So I recommend doing that switch right away, and they will just appear in your game catalog, which is awesome. Lastly, there's the battery. There's the CMOS. I guess it's like a CMOS. It's the little dime.
Eu tinha visto isso, que a bateria ela tá num lugar mais fácil de você trocar.
Things and needing to replace batteries and consoles with like the PS4 and the PS3, right? It's inevitably something that's going to happen with the PS5 years in advance. When the system has no battery, it seems like you can't activate and play digital games, which is a problem. So you need the battery, right? Well, they actually made the battery very usable, user serviceable now. There's a little port under one of the plates, just like the NVMe drive, where you can pop it right out. So, good thing to know.
Tem uma TV 75 com a modelo de 2024 da LG, que era muito difícil jogar nela com o PS5 básico Pro. Pô, tu já tem uma TV cabulosa, né, mano?
The same question. and I'm guessing that your opinion probably hasn't changed that much.
Quando fizer review, presta atenção numa coisa pra gente, por favor. Se a sensação da imagem na TV é melhor do que o vídeo que você consegue upar no YouTube, tenho receio de compressão do vídeo enganar. Não, isso aí eu posso te falar sem nem ter testado o Pro. Isso é até uma coisa que rola até pro PlayStation 4, porque eu lembro o seguinte, tava conversando com o Andrew, o namorado da Yu, né? Eles iam vir aqui em casa e ele tava na dúvida se ele pegava o Black Myth Wukong no PC ou no PlayStation. Eu falei assim, cara, vai pro PC, mano, porque no PlayStation o modo performance tá cheio de artefato. E, pô, eu jogando aqui, mano, mexia, eu via aqueles artefatos pra caralho. A textura parece que tava fazendo aquela textura com um upscaling fudido. Eu falei assim, mano, não tá legal o modo performance no PlayStation, vai no PC. E aí ele veio aqui, e aí, tipo, eu joguei o console, tirei o console daqui do estúdio pra poder jogar lá na sala, na TV. E aí, pra gente poder jogar um joguinho de luta e tal, a gente botava lá. Eu falei assim, cara, deixa eu te mostrar como é que tá o Black Myth Wukong aqui, que você tava na dúvida. É impressionante, meu amigo. A TV, ela faz alguma magia. O input da TV, ele é muito melhor do que um monitor. Essa conversão que ele faz. E estava jogando lá, eu fiquei de queixo caído, velho. Na hora que eu coisei assim, falei assim, não tá ruim aqui na TV. Na TV aqui tá bom. Tá aceitável. Aí eu fiquei, pô... Aí ele olhando, e ele coisando isso e eu com aquela cara de palhaço assim. Não, tá completamente aceitável jogar assim. Não tá a mesma coisa que eu vi. Então, aonde você assiste o conteúdo, ele faz muita diferença. Se você tá jogando num monitor colado na sua cara, se você tá assistindo pelo celular, se você tá assistindo na TV e tal, ele vai fazer diferença. É bizarro, mano. Eu fiquei assim, porra, fiquei igual um palhaço, velho. Coloquei o negócio na sala ali pra mostrar pra ele a parada como é que tava cagado e não ficou cagado.
Probably not. No, I basically have the same opinion, which is that I think it's very compelling hardware. I think that a lot of the mix that you'd want out of a more advanced console, possibly even a next-gen console, is here, in terms of an improvement in RT capability that's big, machine learning capability, obviously faster raster performance. It's improving where it matters for a mid-gen refresh model. That's especially important here because there's kind of an open mandate for developers in terms of what they do. If they add PSSR, if they add ray tracing, if they improve resolution, it's not like PS4 Pro where the target was squarely on high-res displays. That's also kind of here with 8K, although I expect 8K will be a fairly marginal feature. Not a lot of games will support it, I suspect, personally. It's going to be much more about like these settings improvements and image quality improvements that you might get from PSSR and things like this, more interesting things that developers will hopefully do with the console. At the same time, I think the early software, there's some really strong efforts from Sony in particular, from Square Enix. There's some very strong stuff there where you're basically getting 4K 60 performance modes, subjectively speaking, good-looking 4K 60 performance modes with PSSR in a lot of titles. In Horizon without PSSR, but incredible image quality there. You're getting really, really high-quality software that is taking advantage of the console in a good way, especially for early efforts. But there are also some games that aren't faring so well. Obviously, we talked about Dragon Age, we talked about Dragon's Dogma, we talked about Alan Wake a little bit in some image quality aspects, at least in Alan Wake. So I do think that developers maybe need to get to grips with the hardware a bit more. Maybe target resolutions might need to change. Output resolutions might need to change. Things like this, visual features might need to change in terms of what developers are targeting for their modes as well. But overall, I like new console hardware. And the PS5 Pro is very bold and interesting new console hardware, breaking some new ground and creating a new class of experiences, importantly, above PS5, above Series X, something that's going to give you the best experience on consoles in all likelihood for most software. And I'm looking forward to covering it. I'm looking forward to seeing what developers do with it. It should be fun to untangle what developers are doing on the Pro here. And it's going to deliver hopefully a pretty high-end experience for console users. So yeah, I do think that if you want a better PS5, if you have a bit of money to spare, I think the experience today perhaps aren't necessarily what you're buying it for.
Mano, eu tenho um Switch completamente usável aqui, né? É um Switch aqui que eu uso de boa aqui, tranquilo. Eu tô quase querendo pegar um Switch OLED, mas aí eu penso de pegar o Steam Deck OLED também. Só pra poder modar o Switch OLED. Deixar o Switch OLED ser uma máquina de emulação bolada, tá ligado?
It's the experiences in the future
que a tela OLED é bizarra, mano. É muito foda.
Deliver in titles like F124, in titles like GT7, in titles like Horizon Forbidden West, in titles like The Last of Us, in titles like Ratchet & Clank, in titles like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It's those games that you're looking out for. And there, I think you're going to see more software like that in the future. You're going to see more compelling experiences, and you're going to see some value out of that unit that you might buy today. And you might get a pretty compelling experience out of it. I think that's where you're going to be with the PS5 Pro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my sort of final thoughts on this are pretty straightforward. You know, if you look at the concept of paying more for more features and more performance, it's basically the standard sort of thing on PC, right? You know, nobody's really having discussions there saying, I can't really tell the difference between my 4070 and my 4060 because, you know, it's quantifiably different. The PlayStation 5 Pro is quantifiably different and quantifiably better than the standard PlayStation 5. The issue here is that developers are actually specifically targeting that standard model to get a good experience. So basically, it comes down to this. Standard PlayStation 5, a good experience. And that good experience will be good for probably the majority of the market. Maybe the majority of the market still have 1080p screens. We don't have that visibility at the moment. We don't
queria
have
ver
that
também, né? Isso é interessante. Você, por favor, só responde quem tem PlayStation 5 ou Xbox Series X e tal. Series S e PS4, de boa. Vocês que têm esses consoles mais potentes, qual é a tela que vocês jogam? É 4K? É 1080p? É um monitor de 1440? Como é que é aí pra vocês? Porque realmente, mano, quem tem uma tela 1080p ou até 1440p, pô, esquece PS5 Pro tranquilo, né?
Platform holders do. But even a 4K screen at longer distance, it's still going to be great. The PlayStation 5 is still a really good console, as is the Xbox Series X. That doesn't change. So you have good with the base unit, and then you have better with the Pro. And if you look at the sales split of the PS4 Pro and the PS4, it was like
20%.
I think it was like 80-20. And so there are 20% of the audience that want a better console, and I suspect it's going to be...
Ó, tô vendo aqui de vocês, TV 4K 120, 4K LED. Não tenho a mínima ideia se a minha tela é 4K, justo. Ó, usar pra 1080p, 4K 120. Pô, tem uma galera com 4K 120, hein? Monitor 4K, 1080p ainda. Tem uma TV 4K e um monitor 1440, 4K 60. 4K. Tem bastante gente com TV 4K já. Tem alguns 1080p, mas tem bastante gente com pelo menos um 4K 60. Interessante, interessante. E bastante gente com 4K 120. Tô até um pouco surpreso. Legal, legal.
Exactly the same thing for the PlayStation 5 Pro. There'll be a minority of users that want to pay more to get more. And this applies to all levels of consumer electronics. I mean, I've got a Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. I don't really need one because, cheaper phones would do most of the same job. But, I had the funds to spare. I wanted the better performance and the better features, so I paid for it. And that's exactly what the PlayStation 5 Pro is doing. What I will say is that the concept of a $700 console...
É assustador.
In terms of expanding the audience, it's going to do nothing, I don't think.
Sem sombra de dúvida.
I don't think that's going to change anything there. And then, of course, going forward, if the idea is that, cutting-edge silicon, you need to pay more for it, where does that leave the next generation of consoles? That is a bit of a challenge. That is problematic, I think, and I'm going to be really interested to see how the traditional console manufacturers, Sony, Microsoft, even Nintendo, handle that. But right now, you have got this problem of a $700 console, and I think that's, possibly not an issue when you're talking about a niche product. But, moving into the mainstream with the next generation, I don't think you can put out a console for $700. But that's a problem that, the platform holders are going to have to deal with in a few years' time. For right now,
Como é que vai
as I
ser o
said,
preço do
you've got
PS6,
good
meu amigo?
with a $500 console. I guess it will get discounted in Black Friday. And you've got better with the Pro as a $700 console. If you can tell the difference, we've done a pretty good job of highlighting how the Pro improves matters. If you can tell the difference, if you have the funds, well, it's the best console available at the moment, I'd say. I don't think there's any real contesting of that.
Microsoft não fez nenhum competidor, né?
So I think that's everything. I think that's the end of all of the discussion points we wanted to have in this review. So thanks for the two of you, first of all, for basically...
Você tá fazendo a despedida dele aí, mas deu pra pegar. O próprio burguês safado, a galera de computação tá tensa, tá indo tudo pra IA e esqueceram dos HW. Cara, pode crer, mano. Eu acho que é isso aí. O Pro é um console pra quem tem grana pra poder comprar o console. E é isso, né? Mas... pelo que a gente viu aqui, mano, tem alguns exemplos que são bem interessantes, né? O Stellar Blade e o Final Fantasy VII, eu acho que desde que eles mostraram ali foram que mais deu uma diferença notável. Apesar de que o Stellar Blade eu gostaria que ele tivesse comparado, mas mesmo sem comparar, né, tendo mostrado antes ali, eu já consegui ver uma melhora. Mas ao mesmo tempo, esperava mais um pouquinho, né? Sei lá. Eu acho que é uma diferença que não é difícil justificar, nunca vai justificar, né, pelo esse preço, mas o Alan Wake foi o Alan Wake que eu fiquei assim, caralho, mano. Não sei quanto a vocês, mas na hora que chegou o Alan Wake pra mim, eu quebrei, velho. O Alan Wake, o modo do Pro rodando pior do que o do PS5 normal, eu falei assim, não é possível, pô. Não é possível que isso aconteça. Baldur's Gate 3 a 38 FPS, cara, o Baldur's Gate foi tenso também, mas o Baldur's Gate eu já imaginava, né? Por ele não ter nenhum aumento na CPU, e aquela parte ali ser limitada à CPU, eu já imaginava que ia rodar do mesmo nível lamentável. E talvez isso mostre pra gente que seja um indício de quem tá esperando aí que o PS5 Pro rode o GTA 6 a 60. Eu acho que tá à prova aí com o Baldur's Gate, mano. Que com certeza o GTA 6 ele vai ser limitado igual o Baldur's Gate, que é limitação pela CPU. Se fosse limitação pela GPU, a gente viu o jogo que fez diferença. Elden Ring fez diferença. Qual outro jogo que ele lançou ali que tinha feito diferença ali, que a gente tinha visto? Teve... Ó, de GPU, teve o Final Fantasy fez um pouquinho de diferença, mas não o suficiente. Então, se fosse alguma coisa que fosse um gargalo da GPU, mas com certeza vai ser CPU. Com certeza vai ser CPU que vai gargalar o GTA 6. Porque é inteligência artificial, né, cara? Toda coisa que vai... O NPC, toda a programação do NPC é tudo em cima da CPU. Então, duvido muito, cara, que ele vai conseguir rodar a 60. Rockstar faz milagre? Cara, espero, viu? Espero, porque vai precisar de um milagre, mano. Pelo que a gente tem visto ali, quantidade de NPC aparecendo na tela, expectativa de melhoria em tudo. Coisa de maluco. Eu fico feliz porque não vou precisar trocar o PS5 nem tão cedo. Cara, eu acho que, tipo assim, quem já tem o PS5, quem já comprou o PS5, cara, acho que, sei lá, pelo que a gente tá visto até agora, né? Nem acho que vale o esforço, né, de fazer o upgrade. Se eu puder pegar o PS5 Pro no Paraguai por volta de 4.500 a 5.000, acho que sair o upgrade vale a pena, especialmente pra quem ainda não tem um console. É porque hoje em dia tá com 3.000 e pouco aqui no Brasil. Aí a diferença vai ser até ok, né? Se você achar meios de trazer do exterior, talvez valha a pena. Né? Porque você vai ter uma melhoria em alguns jogos. E comparando com o preço aqui do Brasil, não ia ser tanta diferença, né? Opa, fala aí, Card. Eu tô esperando o remaster do The Order em 4K 60. Vai ser pica. Cara, The Order talvez The Order e Bloodborne, né? Os dois mais negligenciados aqui da PlayStation. Mas o The Order é até entendível, né, cara? Teria esquecido. Mas é um jogo que, graficamente, né, o Card? É um jogo que saiu bonitão, né, mano? É um jogo que até hoje você volta e fala assim, cara, o jogo é bonito. Loucura. Qual o estoque da Rockstar? Acho que sempre miram no 30. Normalmente eles metem o jogo a 30 mesmo. E tacar, tipo, a maior coisa possível em questão de inteligência artificial, dos NPCs, né? Então eu acho que vai ser 30 mesmo, cara. Acho que é 30 mesmo. Eu tenho um PS5, devo me preocupar com o futuro? Então, há-se um debate, né? Se a mera existência do PlayStation 5 Pro põe em risco a otimização dos jogos para o PlayStation base. E só o futuro dirá, mas eu sou super ateu dessa teoria, cara. Porque, mano, o PlayStation 4 Pro foi uma base de 20% de adesão, né? Então, de 100 PlayStation 4 vendido, 20 era o Pro. Esse número vai ser menor com o PlayStation 5 Pro. Isso aí é uma coisa que a gente pode prever na tranquilidade. Porque é um console que está saindo mais caro, né? O PlayStation 4 Pro ele saiu no mesmo preço que o PlayStation 4 originalmente. E ele abaixou, né? Na versão do Slim, ele abaixou o preço. Então o PlayStation 5 Pro já está saindo como um item bem mais premium do que o 4 Pro na época. E fora que o 4 Pro, ele veio junto com o TV 4K. Então ele tinha um chamativo. Você quer uma TV 4K? Você quer jogar em 4K? Olha o Pro aqui. Entendeu? Esse aqui não tem chamativo. O chamativo é... O jogo tá ruim, né? Pô, mas tá ruim? Há um debate, né? Então é uma questão que o 4 Pro era bem mais marketável. Então eu tô imaginando, mano, entre 10 a 15% de adesão do 5 Pro. É um chute. E aí tu vai fazer um jogo, tu vai deixar de otimizar pra 90 a 85% da tua fanbase, que você vai lançar o jogo pra poder agradar de 10 a 15%? Pô, pra mim isso não faz o menor sentido, sabe? Então por isso que eu sou ateu dessa teoria de que a existência do 5 Pro vai atrapalhar os jogos e a otimização, sabe? Porque eles vão querer que a maioria do público que for jogar tenha uma experiência boa com o seu jogo, né? Não é isso que você quer? Que o público tenha uma experiência boa? Então você vai mirar aonde tá a maior parte do público, cara. Eu espero que o PS5 Pro, na verdade, vai puxar os jogos pra cima. Eu digo, ele deveria ser a pá de cal do PS4. Cara, pior que eu acho que ele não vai, mano. Eu acho que ele só vai entregar uma experiência mais nítida, sabe? Do mesmo jogo que vai rodar nas paradas normais, sabe? E pelo que a gente tem visto de histórico, nem feature a mais ele vai botar. E quando bota, como é o caso do Alan Wake, né? Que bota tipo Ray Tracing, capa 30. Aí é foda, né? Aí ninguém quer. Não vai deixar, Kaká, já tá saindo mal agora, só vai piorar ainda mais? Cara, eu não acho que vai piorar ainda mais, Ocardia. Eu acho que, igual você falou, já tá ruim. Vai continuar sendo ruim. E aí, anota o que eu tô dizendo, hein? Vai sair um jogo ruim, vai sair o Monster Hunter Wilds. Ele vai sair ruim. E aí vão falar que no PlayStation 5 Pro ele roda bem. Vamos supor que o patch do Pro, o Monster Hunter Wilds, rode bem. Vamos supor. Né? E aí vão falar que é por conta do PS5 Pro a otimização do 5 normal tá cagada. Só que, pô, o Dragon's Dogma já tá cagado. A gente já viu que era um histórico que já tá lançando cagado. Então, mas podem aguardar. Vai ter gente que vai falar que o Monster Hunter Wilds saiu cagado por conta da versão do Pro. Que eles não otimizaram direito por conta do Pro. Só que a gente vê que o histórico já acontecia isso antes da existência, né? Então, hoje tá foda, velho. O Resident Evil 4 Remake, mesmo ano passado, 720p 30 foi no PS4 base. No Pro, 4K 30 FPS. Cara, pô, o Resident Evil 4 Remake, Cadia, foi um exemplo legal da gente poder testar também aqui no 5, hein? Porque é um jogo que, como você falou, né? Vai até do PlayStation 4 base. E a gente vai ter aqui o suporte com patch oficial pro PlayStation 5 Pro. Vai ser uma comparação bem legal, hein? Mas hoje tava rodando 19 FPS, Kaká, na beta. Não, calma. 19 FPS? Não senti 19 FPS, não. Talvez em um lugar muito específico. Mas, tá. Isso não muda o que eu falei agora há pouco. Eu não entendi. Ainda mais sendo beta. Eu não entendi o teu ponto. Os desenvolvedores que têm que melhorar as otimizações. Isso aí, cara. Eu acho que eles têm que ter... A gente vê, cara, jogo que tem uma otimização ruim, o próprio Dragon's Dogma mesmo. Ele tá hoje em um estado bem melhor do que quando ele lançou. Né? E a gente tem visto alguns outros jogos, o Star Wars Jedi Survival. Ele também tá num estado melhor do que quando ele lançou. Então tá fazendo falta ter um tempo pra galera otimizar. Isso tá fazendo muita, muita, muita falta, né? Para as desenvolvedoras. Eu acho que esse é o maior problema. Não é nem a existência do Pro. Mas é isso, cara. É isso. O que eu achei? Fiquei um pouco mais decepcionado com o 5 Pro. Um pouco, cara. Fiquei um pouco, sim. Um pouquinho mais decepcionado. Eu já tava na expectativa de que iam ter jogos que iam fazer mais diferença do que outros. Mas o número tá baixo, né? E tem alguns jogos tipo Dragon's Dogma mesmo que tem alguns bugs, né? Pelo que a gente viu, um bug gráfico. Então, sei lá, mano. Não tô tão animado não, mano. Deu uma desanimada. Mas é isso aí, meus queridos. Conforme a Digital Foundry for lançando mais vídeos, né? Pelo menos ele salvou muito, né? A questão dessa review inicial. Porque, cara, tava muito precário. E aqui deu pra provar que foi meio que um desleixo da galera mesmo, né? Porque chegou a Digital Foundry não tem um review diferenciado, não tem um embargo diferenciado. Não existe isso, né? Eles chegaram e mostraram uma penca de jogo no PlayStation 5 Pro. Então, a galera que ficou só no Ratchet & Clank e Spider-Man foi desleixo. Né? Então, assim, vamos esperar que a Digital Foundry salve aí e a gente consiga fazer um reactzinho pra ver como é que tá a diferença em alguns jogos mais específicos. Eu tô curioso pra ver os próximos vídeos que eles forem lançar. Mas é isso aí, meu povo. Por hoje, vamos ficando por aqui. Tem um videozinho sobre Resident Evil, que tiveram mais novidades sobre o Rumour, que eu vou lançar ainda hoje. E o nosso primeiro episódio do RPG lança amanhã, sem falta. Já estamos exportando aqui para poder finalizar o episódio. E conforme falei, né? Conforme for lançando coisas aqui que a Digital Foundry for lançando, a gente faz reacts e dá uma olhada. Beleza, meu povo? Então é isso. Um grande abraço pra vocês. Até amanhã. E fui!